Honor and pleasure to introduce Edith Ackermann. I've known her for about 15 years, and it's been always a real honor and pleasure to interact with her and learn from her. This is her second keynote here at FabLearn. So Edith Ackermann was an associate professor at the MIT Media Lab and a scientific collaborator at the Jean Piaget Centre for International Epistémologie Génétique in Genève. In 1996, she was granted the honorary professorship of developmental psychology at the University of Aix-Marseille in France, and currently she works as a visiting scientist at MIT, at the School of Architecture, and she's also a senior research associate at the Harvard Graduate School of Design and a regular consultant of the LEGO Group. Her research interests center around human learning in a broad sense, from children's play to organizational change, from personal growth to group innovation. She explores the conditions, internal, environmental, technological, under which some people at some juncture are more likely to hold on to their views or let go of them, to opt for closure rather than openness, to favor digging versus leaping, or to persevere rather than quit in the face of adversity, perceived or real. Her overall purpose, to help innovative teams of researchers and practitioners bring strategic research to design and user-centered design to product development, to imagine and promote activities, artifacts, and spaces that bring about delight and foster personal and societal growth, to bring users back into the design process. And I think it's a real privilege to have Edith here. She worked, as I said, with two of the people that are at the very core of this movement, Jean Piaget and Seymour Papert, and was one of the real pioneers of this entire movement on so many levels that it's, it will take me another keynote talk just to explain. So with that, I want to welcome Edith to the stage. Thank you.
Going to be using those, right?
Sorry?
You're using those.
I'm using this one, yeah. I am confused. It's here. Good. Yes. Okay. So thank you, Paolo, for a great introduction. I think you summarized very well the things that I am interested in, so we could go directly to the question and answer session. Like we did yesterday, we reversed the order of things. So I am very pleased to be here at FabLearn because there is a whole tribe of people that I see circling around different places. One is this conference and the work that Paolo has been doing, and I need to learn much more about this fellow program because it seems to me that it takes on an identity of its own because you have all these people from these different countries and also a mix between practitioners and scholars that I don't find in many other places, which is precious. There is also the Another poll that is a reference, at least for me, is the Interaction Design and Children Conference, the Constructionism Conference, and the one that is organized by Gary Steger, Constructing New Knowledge. And I just like very much to circle around these niches and milieu, and I also see many people who circulate between them. So what I did something a bit tricky. I had prepared a talk about the importance of sort of wit and whimsy and humor in the creative process, which I am going to do. But I wanted to connect it back to yesterday, so I did the dangerous thing to sort of have two pieces of presentation, which you never do normally. You don't change your presentation the night before, especially if you are totally jet lagged and tired. So we will see what comes out, but so it is. So yesterday, what came out for me as very important is this notion that making comes in many shades of gray. And the way I would like to sort of capture this is just to say that people make things do things, which is different because we think about programming things in this sense. People try to bring things into being or animate things, which is slightly different, because you don't have to program something to animate it in your mind or in your play space. People also modulate, calibrate, and tweak the course of things, which is, again, slightly different than to make them do things the way you want them to do. And they restore and mend things. And some people, at some times and under circumstances, favor building things up from scratch, from the bottom up, while others love to compose with what's there. And that's also a very different way of going about things. The last category, the ones who like to compose with what's there, I use the word they make do with what's there. They don't just make, they make do with what's there, with what's at hand, and they take it from there. It's a sort of found art approach. And we see a lot of this in the ways actually younger people, maybe the digital natives, I don't know, the way they even think about writing, the way they think about cut and paste literature, but also making. You borrow. You are a bricoleur in the sense that it gives you a great pleasure to even collect things. You don't quite know yet what you are going to do with them, but it feels like it could be useful for later in some purpose. You keep it in mind, you have these things there, and then you move along. Now, beyond making and making do, which already is sort of nuanced, we also often engage in make-believe activities. We do as if, we play what if. And this is what I would like to focus on more today, because I think it is a little bit the forgotten poor cousin from the countryside when we talk about creative processes or tinkering. And making believe or doing as if is also referred to as suspension of disbelief. This is what it means is that I know it's not true, but let me speculate for a moment and say that this is true, this is so, and then from then on I try to actually speculate on what it may mean if I take this as existing. And this is a very important aspect of the kinds of things that creative people do when they are engaging in the process of trying to get to know more about what they don't know yet. And that's when the playroom, in suspension of disbelief, it's when the playroom becomes a stage, the whole environment becomes a stage, action turns into acting, as in performing, and the actors step into the magical circus of play. And even very young children, and alias I would say especially the very young, are born with an incredible knack to carve their niches so that the niches serve them well in return. They actively tap resources around them and play a key role in regulating or steering their exchanges with people and with things. They filter, since they are babies, they filter the amount and quality of the stimulus depending on how satiated or hungry they feel, and they establish or avoid contact, they smile or frown, they laugh or scream, they come forth or step backwards, depending on how safe or willing to be solicited they feel. And when they reach their second birthday, and that to me is important, human infants further enrich the repertoire of action responses or sensory motor conducts through tools and symbol use, which gives them a huge additional leverage. So beyond trial and error, and here you see me coming with tinkering and making, beyond trial and error and clever trial and error, call it tinkering, and beyond learning to walk and talk, to point and scribble, they engaged in so-called, Jean Piaget used to call it deferred imitation, reenactments, and simulations. They don't just move back and forth, act or freeze, set and blur the boundaries in situations, but they engage in a more mediated dance of sort. And that dance, I claim, is often ignored by proponents of hands-on learning, whether today's makers or yesterday's wannabe constructivists. So active or interactive learning, I call it a person's ability to sustain or support the cycle of self-directed learning. This is a slightly different idea than the idea of learning by doing, is to engage and sustain the cycle of self-directed learning. Is not just about hands-on or making. It's also about heads-in, and Seymour Papert insisted heavily on this. Hands-on without heads-in is blind, and heads-in without tool use is paralyzed. It is about how people shift between not just hands-on and heads-in, but, and this is important to me, between first-hand or direct experience and second-hand or mediated forms of experience. And here I want to make a point that is a little bit a provocation maybe to a certain kind of entrepreneurial sort of do-it-yourself types of views about what agency is about and what it means to be actually in charge of your own education. And I would like to quote a colleague of mine called Paul Harris, who has written a beautiful book that is called The Work of the Imagination. But what he talks about is that early on, children know to make a difference between the kinds of things that they can experience directly and the kinds of things that they will need the input of others in order to be able to experience indirectly. Now, directly and indirectly is very subtle here. And what he says is that the children develop since very young, it starts at the age of 2 or 3, this ability to know who is a good, and I don't like the word informant that Paul Harris used, who is a good ally to help you actually not just understand, but get a feel for something that you cannot directly experience. And it starts literally with a little guy who wants something interesting, takes the hand of mama, push it there, meaning bring it to me, to children who, when they are in, let's use the metaphor of the extended family, they know to which uncle or aunt or big fat mama or peer to talk to depending on how much and what they would like to have the others an opinion about. And Paul Harris calls one group of people the sort of autonomous agents. And the idea is very much, I need to do it by myself. It's like the toddler attitude or the teen's attitude. I do it. I want to do it. I do it myself. Do it yourself. And the other one he dares calling the trustworthy disciples, which seems like an absolute horror way of qualifying anybody if you are a constructivist, but in a way it's not. And the smarts there, if you know that you cannot experience something firsthand, for example, if you have to try to understand how viruses work, things at the macro scale, or things at, you know, at macro or micro scale, sorry, or things that are too dangerous to experience. What is important is to understand the likelihood that what you hear from somebody is actually going to help you really experiencing it almost firsthand. So, for example, if I listen to the medium, I need to know a lot about who is talking to know whether I can trust them or not. And in the group of Cynthia Brazil, with whom I still work right now, there has been some interesting research done with little companion robots that are not teaching children, but that are encouraging children in learning something. And what's interesting is that, and this was a study done also with Paul Harris, and what was interesting is that the children consider a little robot toy as a trustworthy informant when the topic that they had to talk about are things that are weird for humans. So when it was about weird animals that don't exist, you know, there was this whole collection of weird animals, the kids were sure that the robot was a better expert to talk about it than would be another person. Whereas if you had a story about, let's say, a mama and a family or something like this, they would never think that the robot would bring any value, you know, to sort of punctuate the narrative, and they would go to people. Now, all this to say that, the views that we have about what it means to be entrepreneurial, what it means to be in control, what it means to be in charge of one's own learning, just requires a little bit of finessing. I am being a bit extreme when I bring in the trustworthy disciples, but still I care about the idea. So, in short, the active or interactive learning, again, I call it the person's ability to sustain or support the cycle of self-directed learning, is not just about making or hands-on, it's about how people shift between first-hand and direct and second-hand experience. And the problem is that the action-reflection cycle itself is more complicated than usually assumed. And the debugging process, we spoke about this yesterday, so dear to constructionists in this case, who have a computational background, this process of debugging itself can take on many shades of gray, and mostly ignored by the cognitive miser types. I call them the cognitive miser types. The ones who are completely obsessed by finding the reasons of why there is a discrepancy between what they want and what they got, to go seek the reasons, which is a good idea, but then need to fix the bug, you know, in order to get the gap closing between what they expected and what they got. And what I am very strongly advocated, and that's when the second part of my presentation will come, which will probably never come, but we can talk about it during the whole week, is that what happens is that there are people and there are moments when even the cognitive misers put themselves on more creative mode. And then they continue, they start functioning completely differently. Then what they do is that they enjoy to see the gap between what they got and what they expected, and they say, wow, this is an occasion to bifurcate. I don't know where it's going to lead me, but that's where I want to go now. And this slight change in the ways in which you try to make sense, it's not just about finding reasons, to make sense of this gap between the actuality and the hoped for and the possibilities, to establish this dialogue is at the hallmark of what Piaget calls human intelligence. So it's not just about finding the reasons and trying to diminish the gap between sign and solvert, between what is and what could be, what you would like and not, but it can also be the ability to enjoy the gap and to take the ride even if you don't know where it leads you to. This maybe we can come back in the discussion, but I call it the CCCs because we all have our PPPs and CCC and SFSs. But basically, I think that I call it the cycle of self-directed learning. And one of the first aspects of this is to get connected. It's connect, construct, contemplate, cast, recast. It's theater. It's like reenact. Cooperate is about working together with others. So you see, it's not just about hands-on, or it's not just about hands-on and heads-in. Gordon Task has the very important feature of hands-on, heads-in. He called it playback or speak-back. And that's the part that is so important because it is the ability of actually taking something that happened to you and to reenact it under safe conditions that allow you to be more extreme almost in the risks that you take in order to work through the phenomenon that intrigues you. And that's what drama is about. That's you dramatize to de-dramatize. That's what play is about. You don't just explore things to get sort of more efficient results. You explore things to actually push the boundaries. You exaggerate. You use exaggeration, and you use in order to actually be able to get to wrap your mind around phenomena. And then there is the sharing part, and the continue part is huge. Because what I believe is that at every moment when we do something, there is an evaluation function. And that even after a very small step in solving a most ridiculous sort of problem that is posed by your teacher, at every moment when you have a failure, you think it's a failure. When there is an obstacle, the question is, should I take the next step or not? What's my evaluation of, was it worth it? Was it not worth it? And what happens is that this evaluation function works at different temporal scales at the same time, and that's hard to understand. We are like a gear system. When the minute clicks like this, after 10 times, the other one clicks like this, and the other one clicks. So the kinds of things that you have to do in order to connect people, it's to get them inspired. But that you can do even by giving a conference, for heaven's sake, or by listening to a story or a movie, you know. And while you are listening to it, you are extremely active because you are in awe, because you are inspired, because it is wow. And if you are really inspired and wow and so on, at some moment you will say to yourself, I'm going to try to explore some aspects of this. And you engage. And that's what I call the construct phase. So that's when you start to actually immerse yourself, you engage. And when you do that, you know, you also begin to think about, I call it contemplate, because we have such narrow ways sometimes of getting this cycle of action reflection going that I like to use the word contemplate. But it's the moment where you actually reconsider what you have been doing in the light of what you wanted, and it's this evaluation function. The playback one is the huge one that is so important. I think that we underestimate completely the complex dynamic between mindfulness and playfulness. And we put a lot of emphasis on curiosity, but not enough on playfulness. And they are different in very profound ways. Okay, why it matters. So I didn't bring in, I would like everybody, if you have a chance, to look at a little video of Jérôme Brunner, who just passed away. He was about 99 when he did this little video. 10 minutes. I will somehow circulate it. It's just a 4-minute little video that is wonderful about teaching and learning as the art of possibilizing, and where he talks about the importance of speculation and playfulness, and how we all always got caught as teachers and as learners only in trying to justify and prove. You know, it's the context of justification versus the context of discovery of Kuhn. And it's the most beautiful little piece by this old man who has spent his entire life trying to understand how we learn through teaching and how we can teach to actually support self-directed learning. Now, this is the funny part. I arrive at the end of my first presentation, meaning that I will never get to the second. So I have 10 minutes left, or 9. So what I want to do here is I wanted to draw in part of what we spoke yesterday, but in part also of profound lessons by some of my masters that allowed at least me, and I think other people around me, to begin to think about the art of tinkering in a sort of broader way than clever ways of going about, how do you say, trial and error. Minsky, the Minskism. When he passed away, everybody they did, as a celebration for everybody, they did these Chinese fortune cookies with his Minskisms, with all his quotes. And one of them is brilliant. It says, you don't really understand anything unless you understand it in multiple ways. The Pappertism is to think about thinking or learn about learning is to think about thinking about something. The Batesonism is the notion of deutero-learning, which is very important. He says we never just learn one thing even if we wanted to, nor for that matter would we ever fall for something that we deeply engage in or care about for a single reason. This is a very important notion. It's like even the dog of Pavlov, when you learn about how to solve a problem, but you learn about your own ability to solve a problem. You learn about what they call metacognitive skill. You learn about your own capabilities or perceived capabilities as an agent. You learn always more than one thing. And Jean Piaget says something interesting that you don't expect from him. Play is the answer to how anything new comes about. And that's enough. So the question that I was interested in addressing, and all the rest of the talk will be in the Q&A, is how might we create a culture where being quiet, observant, thoughtful, and contemplative strikes a balance with being a doer, an entrepreneur, a mover, and a shaker. And I think it is important knowing that, especially as a nation, I'm thinking of America now, we are quite uniquely and knowingly restless, doers, entrepreneurs, movers and shakers. A culture where being quiet, observant, thoughtful, a good listener, somebody who has a feel for things that matter but doesn't know how to prove it yet, is sort of downplayed. And a culture where both mindfulness and playfulness are becoming cults or silver bullets to save us from our own restlessness. So I am struck by the notion of mindfulness is so important, the way Ellen Langer talks about it, is this understanding that as soon as we are on automatic pilot, we become mindless, and that as soon, and with all the value of actually categorizing things and imposing our order upon things, once we do that, we are no longer open. We don't have our antenna open to actually look at the odds. And this notion of mindfulness is so important, but it becomes a cult here, where all of a sudden everybody's in a yoga position because they have just been restless for too long. And something similar goes on with play, serious play, and we need to get these kids to play because otherwise they don't develop the grit and so forth and so on. So my second presentation was to answer this question, and I think maybe we can address some of it in the Q&A, but this is an attempt to sort of just, as a first intervention, to just sort of broaden a little bit, let breathe this idea of what, not just making, but you know, learning through first-hand experiences about, and just add complexity and hold the complexity before we try to solve the problem. Thank you. Do you think I can sit down for the questions? Because
you have this microphone. Okay. I'm Deborah Fields. I'm one of the co-chairs of this illustrious conference, and now we can have several minutes for questions. So if you raise your hand, I'll come by with a microphone so that everyone can hear you, including our live stream friends.
that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. And while listening to your last question, how can we create the environment that balances mindfulness and play? Teaching in a highly restricted environment of a Title I school where kids are pretty much externally controlled all day. They come to my art room and I offer them choice, and there's a creative explosion, but then I have to pack it back up in 40 minutes and send them out the door in a straight line with their hands behind their back and the room clean. I'm sitting with that complexity and looking for ideas for how to make that transition gentler for students, and would love to connect with people who are also challenged by that. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think this requires that you talk among yourselves also. Yes?
I have a loud voice, I don't know what the mic
Yeah.
is. I'm interested in the nexus of purpose and play. Did you guys hear me? I'm interested in the nexus of purpose and play. As someone who works with numerous students, I think that idea of getting people to make and to be creative is critically important to getting them involved, but that at some point, what's the purpose? Not so much as that they need to fill a curricular standard, but are they being altruistic? Is there a broader purpose rather than just making a keychain and feeling good about that? Like what is the balance between just finding and being creative and also ensuring that our students and whoever we're working with have a greater purpose in mind?
I have another question back there first, and I'll come back. Are you going to answer that? Okay, next. Did you want to respond to that?
No,
Question?
let's continue.
Oh, you didn't have a question. Okay,
Who
so
wants
you had a
to
question.
continue?
Great, thanks. Yeah, hi. I think the greater purpose is to make design the focus, human-centered
Yes.
design, so that they're not just making a widget, they're making something that matters to someone.
Yeah, this is an important point. I think that there has been a big shift in view. If I look at the history of active learning or constructivist approaches to learning, the important shift, I think, came with scholars and practitioners who suddenly realized that the very notion of constructing new knowledge is about a process of abstraction from concrete to abstract, and the process of decontextualizing. It's like how to move from here and now to more generalizable ideas. And to a certain extent, even constructivists of the sort of Jean Piaget, like the older generation, or Vygotsky, they still had this idea that cognitive development or superior ways of thinking are ways of thinking that actually enable you to sort of disentangle from context and to actually sort of introject or internalize your experience and draw lessons from it. And the big reversal, I see it coming. I saw it myself in the 80s when mostly people who were interested in design. I think of Seymour Papert, I think of Donald Schoen, who wrote The Reflective Practitioner. All of a sudden, people started realizing, wait a minute, there has not been enough focus paid on the opposite of reflective abstraction, which is intelligent form making. It's the process of externalization or projecting out, progettare, design, in order to precisely turn ideas into some tangible artifact that then can be taken as shared ground for a conversation around them. And I think it's from the moment on when people started paying more attention to that process that you had a huge change. And Seymour Papert played an important role in that. Because what he said is we have to put this Piaget on his head. And what he said is even more interesting, because he said Piaget was so obsessed with the genesis of becoming a formal thinker that his contribution to the world, because he took Genesis so seriously, was to actually help us understand the sensory motor grounding and the concrete operational grounding that is required to reach these formal ways of thinking. Now, there has been a lot of water going down the river since then, and we have had the whole tradition of more situated approaches to learning, of more embodied approaches, of enactment theories of learning. And what they have in common is exactly what you say, is that the idea is projecting out is as important as introjecting. And to my pleasure, because Jean Piaget was my master, he already had this insight. Because the way he said it is, if you want anybody to construct cognitive invariance, which was this more abstract substract that you pull out of these different situations, offer variations in the contexts. And this is very close to the idea of Marvin Minsky. If you understand something, you have to understand it in at least 3 different ways. And the whole work that he did on, for example, the way to help children understand concepts such as numbers, it's not just to make it concrete, like, you know, now the fraction becomes a pi, but it's precisely to look at different aspects of number, of numerosity, that actually experts, mathematicians have come up with, like the ordinal aspect of number, the cardinal aspect of number, you know, the inclusive aspect of number. And then you give concrete situations in which those different aspects of numerosity are manifested, and you let the children play around with them. And when they are ready to make the connections between these different aspects, even conservation of number, then you have actually allowed them to build these more abstract or cognitive invariants by offering these variations. And this seems a little bit a paradoxical idea, but it's absolutely key, I think. And actually there was another shift. I noticed it at the School of Architecture, because I work a lot with architects and designers. Is the second shift came like 5 years ago, which everybody was talking about learning as designs for learning. And it was Don Schoen, and design was still considered progettare. We had tools to build prototypes. Rapid prototyping became important. this whole notion of also co-creation of artifacts. But then all of a sudden, everybody now talks about fabrication. And that's another important shift. And I think this shift has to do, and I said it yesterday, with the fact that this very cycle of progettare and building prototypes and then sort of manufacturing is getting accelerated and broken down. Because in a way what happens is that there is no more prototyping needed, almost, with the technologies that allow you for a single project or idea to create a single product. And that completely changes again the ways in which yes, people think about the role of these intermediary objects. I like to call them intermediary objects and not models in actually trying to sort of evolve your design or sharpen your ideas.
Hi. Hello. I've really appreciated your talk, so thank you so much. As a teacher, and I work in China, I've always kind of thought that, you know, our focus on outcomes and achievement and numbers was a unique and almost an extreme thing. But actually, through the workshops yesterday and the talks, I realized that a lot of teachers face similar issues. The demands and pressures of the system and the outcomes that we're supposed to achieve is so strenuous that we face teachers every day who tell us, well, our values are great. The principles of letting kids play free and be imaginative is wonderful, but I don't have time. I got to get through this lesson and meet this standard and then hit the next one within, 10% of the time that I think this should take. And, I was a Stanford student myself, and I feel like this institution has allowed us to take time to think about things in multiple ways and to come at it and to try and to fail and to build on that. Yeah. But I think that is not, that is such a struggle to try to communicate that with people in a system that doesn't promote that by the very realities that we face. Parents come to us all the time and be like, I wish my kids had more time to play. I wish they had more freedom. But how can I face my kid if all the other kids' parents are signing them up for, intensive math classes to get their scores up, and my kid is, scoring a 60 or 70 when they're scoring a 90. My kid feels bad in class. They say, hey, Mom, Dad, sign me up for that, extra math class. I need to get my scores up there. Kids feel bad about that. That's kind of a really harsh reality that parents and teachers and educators face. And I don't think that's unique to China.
No, it's not. Yeah, so
I would just love to hear
your... What I want to say here is that you posed it so well, and we all know that there is no obvious answer to this. And I think it's because of this paradox that many, maybe especially younger people, but I am not even sure about whether it has to do with digital natives or not, people started to realize that with the tools that they have around, with the kind of tribes that they like to mingle with, and given that in a way they know that the information that they need doesn't need to be given through a teacher in a classroom, etc., etc. They started self-organizing. And to me, this was the fascination with these sort of participatory cultures and the maker culture in particular was, and that's why I became interested myself in the phenomenon. Because I said to myself, this is more like the Occupy movement. This is people saying it becomes very difficult to actually get a feel for the type of experience that we think would be really important in order to be able to take the time it takes to learn things in depth and taking all these detours that are needed. But it becomes extremely difficult in the context of this sort of outcome-driven, you know, and this pressure on teachers is something absolutely intolerable. And I don't have an answer to your question at all. The only thing I can say is that this is one way of tapping into the value of this maker movement, is to understand that and it's not just the maker movement, it's also the ways in which many digital natives change their own ways of writing, of working together, of sharing, of mending, of not just consuming but actually creating. It's a big shift in trying to figure out what kind of support structures do we need in order to actually acquire even the kinds of so-called 21st century skills, you know. And I don't have an answer except to say that I am very interested in the ways in which people self-organize. Young people, students, teachers, and so on. And then, Leah, this is in honor to your talk, and how those who have experienced, even in these sort of marginal ways, other ways of helping learners to be mindful and playful, to take their time and so on, to then try to just create corners, I think, in schools where it becomes palatable that it is a possibility. And maybe in that sense, to have Fab Labs in schools and also to invite children out of school to do performances in places that matter to the community. All these things become very important. And to me, what is important now, when people ask me, you know, I think what's important is almost to look at the journey, the journey that a learner goes through in their day, week, month. Because the school, the Citadel School, can no longer be the only learning hub in which learning occurs. Yeah, they cut me off. The library changes, the cyber cafe is there. There are all these different poles, and maybe it's important to look at this ecosystem in which learning can occur, maybe by sort of thinking of a more edgeless school, but not a formless school, you know, different locations and places where different aspects can be actually developed.
So don't turn your microphone off yet. We have one more question, but our chair decided to take over all of the other questions. Sorry, we have our next session starting, so we would love to keep you talking for hours around a fireplace. So while Paulo asks his final question, would the people who are part of the educator panel please come up to the front and start getting set up? That would be helpful.
Just quickly, Edith, the year of the first Maker Faire was also the year of Seymour Pappert's accident. So I'm curious about what would he say about the Maker movement, and would he see it as a realization of his vision or not?
The perestroika Seymour would think that it is an expression of his vision, and also the fact that he had almost abandoned the hope to work in school context, started working in prisons and started working in all kinds of places. In that sense, I think he would embrace the movement. I think that hopefully, like Leah, if he saw sort of the tone that it takes now, the Maker movement, he would probably, he and Sherry Turkle would find that in terms of epistemological pluralism, there is still some problems there, because it's always the same ones that then take the power and sort of freeze things in a state that is limiting. But I think the perestroika Seymour would have liked it. And Sherry Turkle would like, she had also a sense of humor, she would like the kind of literally epistemological pluralism that you found at the beginning when the movement was still alive, you know, por la libre. And then it gets institutionalized. It's like with every revolution. Por la libre, and then it gets institutionalized. So.
Thank you so much, Edith.